unmute you. You will be muted when your time has concluded. As an alternative, public comment is available and may be provided on the public comment form posted on the LRPC webpage. So those are the formal instructions for those of us who've never attended one of these meetings before. My name is Devanshi Patel, and I am this year's co-chair of LRPC. Eric Berkey is my co-chair, and meeting number 2, which will be scheduled, which we are in the process of finalizing the schedule for, he will be chairing that meeting. Okay, so why don't we do a round of introductions, starting with our esteemed immediate past, current, second in line.
Jim Lantelme, Planning Commission.
I'm Leah Sarley, also with the Planning Commission.
It's Henley Peterson, Planning Commission, and I have a 4th grade citizen here named Darby.
Darby, you want to introduce yourself? No? Okay.
Hi, I'm Grace Stiles. I'm with Scape Landscape Architecture. I'm part of the applicant team.
Hi, I'm Brian Pilot. I'm a principal with Studios Architecture. I'm part of the applicant team.
Kendrick Whitmore with Venable.
Tarcy Dunlop with the Civic Association.
Jeff Williams, Arlington Ridge Civic Association.
Van Hines, Pedestrian Advisory Committee.
Nick Giacobbe, Aurora Highlands Civic Association.
David Howell, Forestry and Natural Resources Commission.
Matt Matsuzak, Arlington County Planning Staff. Peter Schultz, Arlington County Planning Staff.
Did you just get it?
Yes.
It looks good.
No.
I'm going to turn it over to Peter.
Okay. Oh, we've got a few people in the
Oh,
back.
I'm sorry. Sorry.
Rich Vertical of Brookfield Properties. David Cherry, Brookfield Properties.
Is there anybody over here that can't see their board?
Can't see you guys.
Okay. Anybody online? Any commissioners online? Thank you.
Chris Slatt.
Chris Slatt.
Good evening, Chris Slatt with the Transportation Commission.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anybody?
Real estate development team.
This is Augustus Haney with Brookfield Properties.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Now
And
we're
Walter,
turning it over.
Walter Gonzalez
Walter.
for the county Parks and Recs.
Okay, wonderful. Hi, Walter.
Angela Adams from Public Art, the AED. All right. Now I will.
Hi,
There we go. She's driving, so let's be careful. Actually, let me start my presentation just with a refresher of the agenda topics here, and then I'll start from the beginning. Slide. We're going to, staff is going to do the presentation first with a background and process overview and discuss some of the guidance that we have for the topics for tonight's agenda, including some of staff's initial assessment. We'll talk about what the next steps are, what we expect from this process, because this is a little different than your typical LRPC process or an SBRC process. The developer will then do a presentation, and our topics tonight, the LRPC discussion will be the site's proposed density and use mix, their general building design and site layout. The site layout also kind of ties in with the public spaces and the green ribbon, and staff has the most comments about the public spaces and green ribbon. We will have a second LRPC meeting where our transportation planner, Joanne Gabor of DES, will be here to discuss, she could not be here tonight, so we'll discuss the transportation issues, talk about sustainability and phasing, and we'll have a good beat on what kind of community benefits may be a part of this future project. Here, real quick, we got a comment in the chat that they can't hear. You're saying, well, somebody else is like, okay. All right, maybe it's just been. Can folks hear us okay, joining virtually?
I can hear you.
Okay. I just may be talking too quietly. Ashton.
The audio is fine. It may be on Ben's end. I'm not sure.
So this is the what we're here for, the 12th Street Landing Phase Development Site Plan Amendment, and we're doing a long-range planning committee meeting, which I'll explain why in a little bit. This is, again, tonight's agenda, the run-through on the left side of the page. to orient everybody to some background on the process overview that brought us to this stage. The site location is in the Pentagon City sector plan area, as well as the Pentagon City phased development site plan area. It's north of 12th Street, which is going to be one of the major spines of Pentagon City between Fern and Hayes. As you can see, pretty much central and nearly on top of them. And in fact, there is a metro station entrance on the northeastern corner of the Hayes and 12th. The general land use plan is a high office apartment hotel with a little triangle, which means general location for open space. The zoning is CO 2.5. Those of you, it probably fresh in your memory, the whole Pentagon City sector plan process resulted in a change to the general land use plan for parts of Pentagon City, as well as zoning text amendment changes to the CO 2.5 zoning district. So what the developer is proposing here does not need a change to the general land use plan or to zoning. It is just merely an amendment to the PDSP. And for those of you who have been here a long time, it would be like the guidance that was set up for Penn Place before the Pentagon City sector plan was developed and the Met Park, where we amended, we had a planning process for those sites and amended the phased development site plan to kind of set expectations as to what we're going to see develop here in the future, which in this case, we are just setting up basically the parameters. The Pentagon City PDSP, we all know, 1976, it's coming up on its 50th anniversary, and in fact, more than 50 years ago, the planning process began in Arlington, 1972, thereabouts. Some of the last sort of underdeveloped land in Arlington County around the metro stations, especially the Penn Place site. These office buildings were originally built for MCI, the telephone company, when deregulation happened in the late 70s, early 80s. And they're two separate site plans, but still part of the Pentagon City site plan. The buildings were built about 2 years apart. They were the TSA headquarters. They're now almost entirely vacant for the next phase, which will be guided by the Pentagon City sector plan, which was adopted now 2 years ago. The developer is asking to amend the Pentagon City PDSP to entitle potential density and layout scenarios involving future projects. Both developers' scenarios are the same, pretty much the same density, but it's the layouts and uses that the developer has some alternatives. It's a voluntary step. They don't really need to do this. They could have come in for a site plan, but they, at this level, wanted to kind of understand what the expectations would be, especially for community benefits. And we do have some precedent in doing a PDSP that sets up expectations for community benefit phasing and improvement phasing in Crystal City. We did recently PDSP 454, which tied in several JBS sites and laid out exactly to JBG Smith exactly what kind of community benefits we expected with each site plan stage. The developer is proposing here something similar to develop in stages. They are going to develop design guidelines. The design guidelines, I encourage everybody to take a look and review because they will be adopted along with an amendment to the PDSP, sort of entitling the density to this site. But the design guidelines will be setting up our expectations, common expectations of what kind of development parameters will be taking place here. So amended, I already explained most of this, amended conditions of the PDSP. Community will have an idea by the second meeting of the community benefits for each scenario. A phasing approach for the delivery of the community benefits and site amenities, because this will be a multi-building site plan and developed in phases. We want to make sure that both the community benefits and the site amenities, improved sidewalks, the park, the green ribbon are teed up appropriately at each stage, and that we would maybe need to discuss temporary conditions while the other, let's say one stage develops and another stage does not develop for a time. Can we have, so we have done this before in other situations where we kind of set up for some temporary landscaping and things like that. This will adopt general civil engineering plans for the site. We're not going to talk architecture at this level. We will talk about massing and site layout at very high levels. But when it comes to architecture, and the developer has stated throughout their design guidelines to and to us that they will follow they're not asking for major deviations or significant deviations from the sector plan that we can see. So the proposed density and land use mix is to demolish the existing office buildings. They want to establish 3 different land bays for future phasing, and then they have developed 2 different redevelopment scenarios. Basically the upshot is they would have the same final density, which the maximum density that is permitted at this site is 9 FAR, so therefore the developer is requesting that. Of course, they will have, as I explain later, will have to earn that through community benefits. One of the scenarios would be residential, would have some residential in it, as well as, or I should say both scenarios will have residential. Actually, one would have a little bit of office in it by comparison. It just depends on where the market goes for that, but both scenarios will be heavily residential. One scenario would be a hotel, another scenario would have office in that. All those uses are permitted. The colors are actually reversed in this, but I think you get the idea. The developer is showing here their baseline program, which is kind of their preferred development scenario, which is the one at the top here with the a possible office building, and an alternate program, which is residential and hotel. As you can see here, the layout does show room for the half-acre park that is expected at this site through the sector plan. The green ribbon through the site, and this will be the subject of further discussion in this presentation. The white, which is really should be purple, and vice versa, shows the possible ground level floor plans. The sector plan expects, and as we'll see this, up to a 5-story podium, and then towers that are take up much less space above it. As you can see in the preferred scenario, they're offering a 16-foot wide public right-of-way with the green ribbon into the open space. Same thing with the other scenario. The baseline scenario does show some notches out for private open space where they could put outdoor cafes and things like that without encroaching into the public space. Same thing here. You can see where the sort of the dedication lines are set. This is just from the sort of implementing the sector plan, showing the metro entrance and the half-acre park, the green ribbon, and actually it doesn't show here on the north. The developer's presentation will show you the sort of a welcome plaza here at the corner as also anticipated in the sector plan. That one, if I understand correctly, does not have a minimum size. So the Pentagon City Sector Plan is going to be our guidance through this. And in fact, those of you who were with us during that whole planning process, this Brookfield were actually kind of one of the people who steered the planning effort. And I think we came out with a great plan for the site. The guiding principle, I'm not going to read all these, but we expect that these plans will fulfill these various guiding principles of the plan. The land use mix, this is our staff's analysis. Generally, yeah, they meet the land use mix. There's no exact specific proportion of retail or residential or anything that needs, unlike maybe more specific site plans like Clarendon. Guide for the site's density, well, they are requesting the maximum permitted 9 FAR, and we'll talk about that. That is permitted for this site as we go further through this process. I'm not going to read all of this, but there is specific guidance for this site already in the sector plan. So most of our work has been done for us already here. And the developer has agreed that they will be meeting these things. It's kind of the details that we would like to discuss and hammer down in what would be a final approval of this project. The sector plan establishes a fixed build-to zone. So as you can see, there's a general scenario here. build-to lines framing the open space, framing 12th Street. 12th Street's going to be the new spine of Pentagon City. And then along the side streets, Hayes is going to be a major thoroughfare, Fern a bit less so, but still fronting on. And as you'll see, especially in the transportation discussion, there's going to be a new segment of the street coming through here for cars, vehicles, pedestrians, as a way to break up the super block and allow parking and loading. And there are no build-to lines on that. It is meant to be more utilitarian. There's expectations, and the developers says they will agree to them when we get to final building design, how much of the build-to line that they adhere to. As you can see here, there's a formula about blocked here, but this is adopted in the sector plan, and we will analyze these when we get more detailed plans. Right now, these schematic plans, are obviously just a schematic. Ground floor uses are using the color coding of the Arlington retail plan, red being sort of the highest and best use of like restaurants, entertainment, major draws. We want that around the park, and as you see, like Hayes Street is a major traffic arterial, but it's also a major shopping node too. And so we can really think we can focus the retail. Here we have the new building, I forget what it's called, across the street here with some street level retail, new street level retail added to the mall area. This is really going to be our node. Uses will be a little more flexible on the other frontages as you get further away from this node. And again, the developer has stated in their retail program they will adhere to this. Here's our expectations for site vegetation. On site, total about 25% tree canopy. Again, the developer will state they will agree to that. Again, it's more a case of, since we do not have detailed landscape plans, that would come at the site plan level. We'll hold them to these expectations, but there's not much width that we can analyze at this point. But again, the public plaza is also on this diagram, half acre. The green ribbon pedestrian pathway is expected to be a clear pedestrian path flanked by planting areas. And the planting areas, while we did allow flexibility in designing of these areas, it should follow. This is a major part of our plan and should follow, for instance, use what we've established at Penn Place as guidance for expecting shady areas, native plantings, etc. The idea again, and they could use to create a tree canopy along here too. So one of our discussions is here: is there enough room, given the information we have? We think to establish the intent of the green ribbon, which is to provide multiple little areas, maybe for respite, and then areas for planting, and then we have the frontages of the buildings and private cafe areas outside of these areas. So again, we have detailed guidance in the sector plan. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, but we just need to make sure the developer, we're teeing up the development that allow these things to happen. When it comes to density here, the developer is going to have to earn a large amount of density, which was expected through the process. The 9 FAR is significantly higher than what is on the site today. We will be using as their base for the purposes of calculating how much they have to earn what was allocated to this site in the existing Pentagon City sector plan, which is basically the two buildings together. We have a 4.5 acre site, and it does meet our limitations for the FAR. The sector plan for the building heights, when you have multiple buildings, there should be at least 10 to 20% variation between at least two of the buildings, and the developer has shown that they will do that. Green development for new buildings is expected. The developer is stating they will as part of the design guidelines, and they could earn density also through that, through our process as we've established it. Again, just showing building, I think you've pretty much seen this building frontages and the developer's design guidelines, which you see For the public spaces, we think the PDSP, this proposal generally conforms to the minimum half-acre public park, exclusive of the area occupied by the metro entrance, since that's already a public access easement. So we want a half-acre on top of what's the existing public access, and the developers revised to show that. Design guidelines should clarify that there should private outdoor cafe seating areas should not encroach into the green ribbon. We were very careful to make sure not to do that in pen place. And plus, for staff guidance has been for areas that are dedicated to the public and also used for earning density, that privatized uses like private cafes should not be in these areas. Again, that's something that more details, of course, would be discussed at the site plan level, but we want to set that expectation. The Parks and Recreation Department has stated to us that we'll design the park through the SPRC process, not a separate public park process. So it'll be done as we've done with some site plans in the past. When we talk about open space, the developer will, provide, a proposed design. But it'll be part of SPRC and not some separate process. We should tee up the expectation that it'll be designed, constructed, and maintained by the applicant. And when we talk about community benefits, it is the sector plan does state that if the developer does this, that may be a way of them to bring the additional density that they need to accomplish their development program. What we want to be careful about with it, we'll talk about phasing next time, is that and there's not going to be a park master plan, actually, we can take that out. The park master plan is a separate process. Instead, we'll be doing it through SPRC. We'll just confirm how they'll be delivered through the increment, like if only one building is built, how much of it will we get? Will we get temporary conditions on other sites prior to future phases? Right now, we've only started the community benefits discussion, so that's why that is at the next meeting. So you can give suggestions, of course, during the discussion, but we will have a better idea the second LRPC. We have concerns about the green ribbon, so that's probably our number one concern, that it's wide enough to the intent of the sector plan, and that it can meet these design standards that we've guidance in the sector plan. During the site plan review stage, we'll discuss the tower step. We'll be talking about site layout here, but above the sort of the ground level, we don't have much to discuss at this point. So that will be something more at the site plan, but we just want everyone to know that those kind of building sculpting and how their step backs and how they impact the green ribbon are going to be important parts of any when they come in with a site plan for a future building. And same thing, we do have some a couple concerns about the streetscape elements proposed, but we'll talk about those at LRPC too. Joanne, the co-planner here, the transportation planner is so those are really staff's biggest, not many, because we don't have much to review that. The developer, like I said, has stated that they will follow the sector plan guidelines for most everything. So here we are at our first, only going to have a second meeting. We're still trying to figure out how to, when to do that. It'll focus on transportation phasing and community benefits, and then we'll go to the public hearings in the spring. So that is our presentation.
Going to the Planning Commission and to the board, where the SPRCs going to occur?
The SPRCs will be when they have a specific building site plan. This is just we're general.
Okay.
So we're keeping it at the long range plan for me.
Okay.
Great, thank you. So I'll ask Alan if he can share the presentation on his screen. We'll try to do this remotely. Awesome, thanks, Alan. There's us again. There we go. Again, my name is Kendrick Whitmore. I'm with Venable, and we'll hear a little bit from the applicant team here tonight. I'm just going to give you a very brief background on the history of this site and the project. This filing is really just kind of the next step in a process we've been working on for a number of years. Alan, if you can advance to slide 5, please. our guiding principles have really been those based upon county and community documents that we've worked on throughout these years. These include the 22202 livability study, the Pentagon City Sector Plan, and other meetings and discussions with staff and the community. The next slide will show you a timeline. We started this process way back in 2018. At the staff's request, we filed a PDSP for the site. During the pendency of that PDSP, a little group called Amazon came in and announced HQ2. And that really necessitated staff taking a step back, looking at the area holistically, which became the Pentagon City Sector Plan process. We participated heavily in that process throughout those 2 years. And then after the plan was adopted, we went back to the drawing board and instructed the design team to put together a design that was consistent with that sector plan. And so that is what we did, and that's what we're seeing here today. So really a continuation, that PDSP and design guidelines, a continuation of those other plans. I'll just note on the next slide, you'll see this was our application from 2018 and 2019, and you can see there already was a green ribbon in place. We've been considering that a central part of the development since day one. And then I'll show you one of our other renderings here on the next slide of the site back in 2019 when we initially submitted this. So with that background in mind, I'll turn it over to David Shirey and Brian Pilot to talk about some details of the proposal.
Brian Pilot with Studios Architecture. These are our guiding principles, which mirror the same guiding principles as the sector plan, and really stress the importance of everything from multimodal transportation to building equitable communities, to creating places for nature and biophilia to be part of the everyday experience. Next. We've covered some of this, but the importance of sustainability, resilience, and biophilic design, our commitment to LEED Gold, as well as compliance with Arlington County's green building policy, as well as the county's energy goals. Next. Moving to the existing site conditions, we covered this quite a bit. We have a site aerial on the left, some contextual photos of the surroundings if we need to go back to this. Next, please. As we zoom into the existing site plan here, one of the things that we uncovered very early on is that the existing below grade garage covers the entirety of the site. So any of those existing, the structure or the landscape elements all sit on a concrete below grade structure. There's also this natural bifurcation of the site where you're seeing in that red dotted line within the structure as well. And that's going to be influencing our planning considerations. And then we obviously have the very important consideration of the metro access easement, which is also influencing our planning. Next, please. Moving to our concept plan. So again, we're zoomed out here. You're just seeing the dotted outline of the 12th Street Landing site. Next, please. An overlay of the sector plan. A lot of this was covered, but that importance of the half-acre site at the southwest quadrant, and then the green ribbon cutting through diagonally through the site. Next, please. And then our plan, which is essentially capturing those important elements of the open space, once again at the southwest quadrant, adjacent to the metro, and then the continuation of the green ribbon connection. Next, please. The design guidelines that we put forth are meeting the tree canopy and vegetation requirements of 25%. Our goals. Next, please. And here we have a number of precedent images that we've included in the design guidelines to capture the character of the tree canopy and the vegetation as it could apply to different areas in the open space zones. Next, please. And as Ked mentioned, has been mentioned a number of times, we're not at a point where we have architecture. So if you look in that upper right image, what you're seeing there, those aren't building footprints. It is the limits of our zoning envelope for those footprints, but it's showing that those open space for both the plaza as well as the separation for the green ribbon. And then the two examples that you have at the bottom shown in the purple, these are those two alternate program options. but they're showing how we can achieve a good design separation between the towers and still achieve the program in each of those. But once again, very early on. Next, please. And then our design guidelines will meet that 10% height differentiation in the variation, as well as no more than 5 levels max on the podium, and that's part of our design guidelines. Next, please. And then, we've said it before, we're not at a point where we have architecture, but also part of our design guidelines is thinking about the building form in the architecture and, that sector plan guidance and the importance, especially at that public realm as the buildings meet the ground, the importance of what those uses are, transparency, and those transitional spaces are all part of those guidelines. And then next, and then as you move up the building, once again, that importance on the setbacks, the sculpting, as well as facade variation. Once again, all part of our guidelines, which match the intent of the sector plan.
Great, thank you. And again, I'm Grace Stiles with Escape Landscape Architecture. So we really wanted to foreground this, and it's interesting what the contrast on the screen is doing, where it's erased all context. But really kind of starting with the green ribbon and foregrounding this element. It's not only a critical element for our site at 12th Street Landing, but also as a critical link within kind of the greater Pentagon City. And we're going to look at how the pedestrian path and the kind of adjacent planting zones and frontages really kind of create a really dynamic experience through the entire site. So on the next slide, you can see our Part T diagram and really how the green ribbon is a central aspect of our design. It really centers on a circulation network around which different kind of program pockets and areas of activity can be organized. And it's really exciting how our site kind of expands and contracts, and that really allows us to have several different really dynamic experiences. So on the next slide, you can see how we started to think of these as like character zones. So we have the half-acre park shown in pink with the link that moves diagonally through the center of the site, adjacent then to the node. And the green ribbon really kind of strings all of these character zones together. So on the next slide, we started unpacking a little bit of a program framework, and our design guidelines goes into each of these areas in much more detail than what I'll be running through tonight. But we really just started toying with the idea and starting to think about all the feasibilities for these different areas. So on the next slide, zooming into the half-acre park, our key kind of program elements within this area. Of course, the green ribbon that will be pulling through here, that's going to be providing key access to the metro, leading then up through the center of the site with the link up to the node and then again onto Penn Place as it kind of starts to create that entire network. We'll also have a plaza or some sort of central gathering space, probably the largest clearing of kind of paved hardscape on our site. And then looking really at some dynamic edges, so along 12th Street to be open and inviting and welcoming, and then also a landscape edge buffering any of the retail or building uses to create a really kind of engaged and activated ground plane. So on the next slide, this just shows a couple of character images, again, like precedents of what we look to and when we're striving to achieve in these different zones. So forest planting, active building edges, urban connections, etc. Then on the next slide, we look at a similar kind of series for the link. And so our critical or key elements moving through this portion of the site are, of course, the green ribbon and then also program pockets. So those moments of respite that I heard mentioned earlier. And on the next slide, again, we have some character images here showing how that clear circulation and framed views, that's going to be really kind of exciting moving through the center of the site here. Layers of activities and planting with seating opportunities, etc. So then finally, the node, which is this smaller welcome plaza at the corner of Fern and 11th with key program elements of a point of arrival, again, that kind of activated landscape edge along the building and retail frontages, and then also the green ribbon pulling through this portion as well. And on the next slide, again, some character images showing how clear movement and circulation framed by activated building edges and urban connections will really kind of round out this portion of the site. And I believe that is resolution.
Thank you. Okay, wonderful. So, all right. We have a really wonderful agenda tonight. Lots of questions have been answered, I presume, through the presentation. But let's just go, we'll go, as I like to do it, just go around the table. All right, first topic. Proposed density and use mix. Just go around the table. Any questions on proposed density and use mix?
No, except that I'm interested when you can figure it out, the use mix between residential and retail and hotel and office, because I think that affects how you do everything else in terms of the architecture and the landscaping. And so I guess you figure that one out and then you figure out what's the best way to make it work, right? So in that context, that's all I have so far.
In a similar vein, in the use mix, I noticed that the hotel and the condo are kind of swapped in and out, and those seem to be two elements. Condo, we talked about that when we did a presentation earlier, the importance of trying to get ownership into this project, and that would be really important. So if there's a way to put that in both plans, that would be a good thing to consider. And also, are you looking at on-site affordable housing, and how does affordable housing play into this? Thanks.
Sure, I can answer on the affordable element. So the sector plan, and one of the great things about the Pentagon City sector plan is, unlike I think the other sector plans, it tells you exactly what is expected at each site. And one of the things that it tells you that's expected is at least 10% of net new housing be affordable on the site. And so that is the slide that Mr. Schultz showed earlier that showed the base density and the bonus. So it would be 10% of that bonus density above the base. And that we're committed to do on site.
Yes, I have a question about the baseline versus the alternative program, and that determines the layout of the buildings on the site. You have the baseline, show me the one that has these two. And am I correct that scenario one is if you're going to have the hotel for condos and the other one is the other? And I don't understand why you couldn't why you have to have this layout or that layout for those two functions. Because I have a strong preference for scenario two, but I also really like condos.
So ma'am, I'll let the design team answer on the specifics, but just to take a step back, high level, we put these in because that was required as part of the submittal, but we don't know what ultimately this use mix is going to look like. Okay. So this is kind of our best guess at bookending it, right? At a resi heavy and in what constitutes an office heavy nowadays. So,
I get it.
So that we may slide somewhere in between all of that. So I just wanted to put that out there at the beginning, and then if there's some building specific design answers to that.
Can I say why I like scenario two better than one?
Of course, please.
To me, it feels more open. And you have great building edges with scenario two, and you're going to have wonderful southern exposure from 12th Street, and your greenery is going to thrive so much better with scenario two than scenario one. You're in scenario one, your residential, you're going to block a lot of the sunlight. So no matter what you end up building, I strongly prefer scenario two.
That's great feedback. And what we end up coming up with may not be either of those, but that's helpful feedback, those elements too. Thank you.
Keep that sunlight.
So one of the images you had was your first presentation, which showed actually pedestrian ways that actually went up through 12th to 11th. There's more permeability. You haven't drawn that here, but there will be permeability kind of north-south through the site. And the green ribbon is diagonal, but what about that kind of north-south permeability, pedestrian permeability? Yes?
Well, Brian may have, good. I was just gonna say, you can see it here, and what we're proposing doesn't preclude any of that, right? That's kind of what we're trying to show here, the many possibilities, but I don't know, Brian, are you gonna?
Yeah, I think that from what we know now, I think that I don't think we quite know what that
What
bottom
it's going
footprint.
to look like, but it's not going to be just a diagonal pedestrian through, not just a green ribbon.
We wouldn't be able to fill this whole space
Yeah.
through what the sector plan requires in terms of coverage. So yes, there would be, there are going to be openings and breaks. Where they're going to be, I don't know. We haven't designed that yet.
And on the 16-foot width of the green ribbon, does that include the frontage, or is the frontage additional width? And what's in the frontage? Is that clear space visually, or is it because you're going to build into the frontage?
Well, we can talk about that now. I don't want to get into the green ribbon piece yet if we're
Okay.
not there, but I'm happy to talk about it. I just don't know if we.
That's fine.
We
Go
can
ahead.
come back to that.
Okay, either way. We can, okay.
Okay, I presume you don't have any questions.
I think my question or my sort of comment would be similar to the observation about the need for condos, and it's just something that we've really heard a demand for.
Yeah.
If and when possible.
Okay. Ms. Guevara.
Hi. I'm just really supportive of having more density along the metro. And I know this is way too early and we're just at the LRPC process, but I really do want to plant the seed really early on about how important it is to have 30 to 60% AMI units and affordable housing units at these sites. So from right now, I'm saying it, so it's no surprise
You have to
later
hear it at the end again.
Thanks.
Ms. Peterson.
I agree with my colleague, Commissioner Guevara, about more density right near Metro. I'd love to see condos there as well as family-sized condos, as well as affordable housing, family-sized units.
I don't think I have much to talk on the use. I think, I'm a little bit very curious to see where we end up. I wonder what sort of time frame are you thinking this whole process take? And what sort of need for the office versus residential will be at? Is this a 5-year plan you're thinking of?
That's beyond my pay grade, Rich.
Yeah, I'll take that one. I think at the next meeting, we're going to be discussing phasing as well. So, and as Brian alluded to earlier, there's really a natural break in the site, in the structure. So we're really thinking about phase 1, phase 2, and from an entitlement perspective, getting through the ESP process, and then rolling right into a 4.1 site plan. And then however long that plays out, demolition and construction. So it's hard to say when we could actually get a building going. It's probably not 5 years, but just sequentially going through the process. We will be focusing on half of the site because we know 2 residential buildings, multi-family buildings are actionable today. And the question about the office versus resi, that's something we will figure out a little bit further down the road. But we know phase 1, 2 multi-family buildings is actionable, and we can deliver the half acre open space. And again, we're going to get into a lot more details at the next meeting.
Thanks. I think that's good. And I think the follow-up with that would be the open space and when that would be delivered, as much as we can do that earlier rather than later. Both from the urban aspect, the local new building, right, as it goes in, the first building, it'd be nice to have a decent environment around for the newcomers and of course the folks that are here. I think that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, I can't disagree with anything any of my colleagues at the table here have said. I'm very grateful we're using full density here. The past 4 or 5 projects that have come before the planning commission have not taken advantage of the available density, and I'm getting a bit concerned about that. So to see that you're doing that, I just hope in the future you don't come back and say, oh, we're really going to build a 7-story stick built. Because I've seen way too many of those. So I like that. I also hope that even after phase 1, we can at least have an interim green ribbon built and usable. It doesn't have to be the final design, but something there that the space is permeable and you can walk through to show that, yeah, this really will happen. And it can have all sorts of signs at the interim, but we should have something there pretty early on. And I will be interested in also having a north-south connection mid-block of some type. But I think this is all moving in the right direction. I think is consistent with the Pentagon City plan update. So I'm very excited about us being able to move forward with this.
Yeah, I will just add, I'm glad that you were able to get your density, Jim. So I will say, I agree. I have a preference for the scenario number 2. I can't say that it's for all the, expertise-based kind of reasoning that you have. I think just visually, it really kind of works for me. And I also think about the fact what Commissioner Guevara is saying. The projects that have come before the Planning Commission are just meeting their basic requirements around affordable housing, and that is a huge problem for me. And I think it's a huge problem for this commission. So just meeting the basic requirements is just simply not enough for the commission, I think. There was a comment made at the last meeting about, I agree with what Tenley is saying here about family-sized units. There was a comment made about there would be consensus amongst us to swap out one for the other. I don't think that that's actually true for us. Quite frankly, I think that you're seeing a bunch of nodding heads saying maybe not necessarily, but it is certainly true that we are looking for more units under 60%. And, we have a gap there, and that needs to be, I think, it's the responsibility of all of us to make sure. So you're going to probably hear it at every LRPC meeting from now on for any development project that includes some residential component to it, that there has to be, we have to go above what the minimum requirements are. You want something else? Yep.
Between scenario 1 and 2, I don't have a preference simply because I think, if I heard correctly what you're saying, and we should all recognize is that this is to basically meet the county's needs. What ends up coming before us in coming years could be something different than both of these. I'm completely fine with that. I understand that we have, the marketplace is going to dictate what gets built here. That's okay. That's the whole point of this plan, is have flexibility. So I'm fully prepared to be neither scenario 1 or scenario 2 when it actually comes to something real with SBRC.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure everybody at the table understand that will probably be the way this shakes out.
Yeah, it's we're loosey-goosey right now.
Yeah.
But I think that it goes to, I think the important note here is that area down there has changed so much. I mean, we don't even have to go back to 50 years. I mean, it has just changed a lot, even in the last few years. And so I think this particular space, this particular project, there's so much value to it, right? Because there's so much that the community can get, and I think it wants to receive from this space. So no pressure, but. All right, everybody's been heard on the first topic. Okay, let's move to the next one then. General building design and site layout.
Sorry.
Thoughts?
I haven't been.
Oh, I'm sorry. Who is that?
Ben Devanza.
Ben, okay, thank you, Ben. It's Peter's fault because he took the thing we couldn't see. Thanks, Ben.
No, it's my fault because I missed introduction in the morning at the beginning because I was having tech issues. So just as speaking to the scenario differences, I noticed there's a difference in the scenarios around also at the corner of Army, or no, it wouldn't be, I guess it would be 11th Street in Eads, where the scenario 2 has a little bit more of a plaza space, and I just worry about driving people because it doesn't quite, the way the green ribbon works, doesn't quite drive people like right across to the intersection, instead it ends a little bit south. And so I like that scenario 2 has that more of a plaza to help guide people towards the actual intersection, rather than driving people and they end up 20, 30 feet south of the intersection and end up crossing the Fern, which, we've had some pedestrian safety problems on, and encouraging people more to go all the way to the intersection. So just highlighting that component of scenario 2 as well.
Thank you. Okay. I don't see any other hands up, so I think we're moving on to the next one, which is, again, general building design and site layout.
Yeah, thank you. So my first question, which was about the outlines for the podium versus the land base, and I think I got that from what was already said, so I'll skip. That seems clear. In line with what Jim said, I do think, and I would like to see the tower structure and the podium structures not be either of those choices. I know that's just, you put it down there as a placeholder and but I think as you explore using the space and who's going to be using the space, there'll be opportunities to see how it can be, have that holistic perspective within the context of the site, where the site is placed and what's next to it on either side, and what in the future will be on the other side and the other side, and how it can become its own centerpiece as part of a broader image of a natural urban space. Okay, I'm really glad you got these guys. I hope they're, landscape should never be the last thing you think about. Landscape should be, yeah. So just a couple of points then, as sort of topics for thought. One is organic lines. Try to avoid right angles. You're going to have some geometric, but just not right angles, like trapezoidal tower structures. It's better for the wind. It's better for the solar. It's better for the feeling that people have when they're around it. It has a sense of opening up, even if the square footage is actually the same or bigger. Second thing is horizontal surfaces. Have as many as you can. I'm fine with 4 different, step backs. I don't know how that works in terms of cost effectiveness of the structures, but when you have a footprint, you've basically taken away surface space for people to use. And the more you can create that in places where people are able to use it, the more the livability of the space is enhanced. And that means planting. And that can also mean things like solar panels on pergolas, like 9 feet or 10 feet high. So they create shade for use outdoors, but also provide the solar power. Especially, in the upper 5 to 15 stories, you're talking also about a little bit of wind abatement sometimes. So I would suggest that you explore that as a possibility. It also makes the panels 8 to 12% more efficient because they are affected by surface temperature. So the optimum temperatures for solar panels are 75 to 90 degrees. And everyone knows that a rooftop can be 120, 130. It's not good for people. It's not good for the power generation either. And then the last thing is, and I tried this, I think we talked one time about the water park.
Probably more than once.
It wasn't quite what I wanted. It was a little bit more Las Vegas and a little less, Adirondacks waterfall, but rainwater, it's going to have to be managed. But I think there are ways you can use that to enhance the biophilic context a lot, including have some holding tanks, on a 3-story, step back, and have it go down a waterfall with a pump at the bottom, and it recycles, and a couple of heaters and running the pipes inside, and you don't have to worry about it freezing ever. I have that in my yard, so I know it works. Not 3 stories. Anyway, yeah. When we're thinking about the footprints, and we're thinking about the podium, everything, and those are parts of the overall conceptual image of the space. But if you do it all holistically with what's it going to look like and feel like, then you get the optimum for that, and you also get the optimum for livability and biophilic experience. And by the way, once Penn Place gets done and once on the other side gets done, you're going to have wildlife in there. So don't forget bird glass.
Thank you.
That was, you knew I was getting there.
I have to follow Dave. Just a couple of comments, not quite as eloquent on site layout. In looking at the images and the discussion of the open space, we heard a lot about hardscape. And I ask you to look for ways to soften it up. Use things like water features, trees. Let's not have lots of open, hard plazas and lots of hardscape. The other thing is on the north-south passageway from 12th to New 11th Street. I'm glad to see that's there. If there's a way, since both projects are kind of loosey-goosey moving around, if the placement of that north-south element can align with the Kimco north-south passage, that would be great, especially for pedestrians. We're cutting, as we try to chop up these super blocks, if those can be aligned, that would be a nice feature. That's it.
What they said. My only other suggestion is if when you're designing restaurant retail space, inverted cafe zones, like the Lebanese Taverna, which has these it's in the West Coast, Joy Street, gotta get the right name. They have walls that open up. You can open up the windows, you can open the doors, and it creates this just wonderful magical space. And actually in Met Park, they've had that with the first Amazon building too. And it's just game changing to do something like that. So do some of that.
Endorse what Dave said. I think that's really important.
I think the comment earlier about sort of the sunlight and where the sun is able to come through is really important. There's a lot of the building along Crystal Drive has sort of prevented sunlight from getting in a lot of the day. It's less pleasant in the summer when there's shade, it's excellent. So I guess there's sort of a balance to be had, but it would be nice to be able to have some less windy places to be outside, even as you were sort of building up and up.
Okay. I'm just looking forward for you to incorporate some of the great suggestions that my colleagues have already mentioned. Already, your renderings are huge improvements from the concrete jungle that's there. So I think it's going to be a great improvement overall.
Thank you. I'd love for you guys to make sure you're taking a close look at our Biophilic Cities Network Agreement. We joined that in March 2020, so make sure we're being very intentional about bringing biophilia into the architecture as well as the green ribbon, looking at ways we can use architecture to avoid the heat island effect with designs like green roofs and water features that Mr. Howell's already mentioned, and of course, bird-friendly glass. Yeah.
All right, I have a few items. On the building, I'm not ready to pick a preferred scheme, but I think, as was mentioned by Commissioner Van Hine, the southern exposure and sort of wind awareness is definitely something to keep in mind as you design. Along with that, if you can reduce the amount of glass, that's always helpful, both from the bird friendly, from the energy aspect. I would beg that we sort of be on the forefront of degasification as much as we can do it. I know that's a little bit of a lift around here, but they're doing it in Toronto, so imagine we can probably, I know it's probably a bit more, but it's probably something that we ought to at least try to reach for you guys. And almost go passive on some of these high rises if possible. I think that's all I have on the building. On the site layout, I'm always a little skeptical of corner parks and corner plaza because of that enclosure or lack of enclosure, right? That sense of anti-space almost, to use an academic term. And then I think across the street, we have a not very good example of urban design. It's essentially street level activity, mediocre, and then there's like 4 stories of a solid wall with this sort of, so I don't think that that's a very pleasant sightline, unfortunately, from the plaza. So, ways to create that sense of enclosure, that sense of blocking the site, anywhere from trees to pergolas to, Bernini's sort of plaza in front of the Vatican, a little much. But, that sort of effect where you can have sort of an urban gesture, but also that sense of enclosure, safety, and then it starts to become a more successful park. We have a park on the corner of Columbia Pike and George Mason, which is not very successful because of that. We have an open plaza in front of the Civic Center on Columbia Pike, that now has a do not enter sign, which I thought was very telling of what bad design causes you to do. You have to put signage, you know, it's literally a plaza by the Arlington Mill. I know, I was just as shocked. The Arlington Mill has this plaza and it has this do not enter sign. And obviously had to put there because people were trying to drive through the plaza. So, you know, these corner plazas that aren't defined are inherently more difficult to design. Good challenge to a good architecture firm, so, and a good landscape firm, sorry. So, you know, I'm sure you guys can do a good job, but I think that's a few of my reaction to the diagrams and the layout.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these things really are scarcity technical things, so I'm not going to get into any of those. But the basic massing, I think is appropriate. I like the idea of the low podiums with the towers then, because that will open that up to the sky. It'll make it more pleasant walking along the green ribbon and whatever north-south connection gets made. So it won't be as overwhelming. So the density will be nicely balanced, and you'll still be able to have sky and light. So I do very much support the idea of having the podiums that you're putting here and having them fairly low. So I think that really works for me. The actual how it's all going to be apportioned, that's SBRC level. We'll deal with that later. But the basic concept here is something I'm definitely on board with. I hear Commissioner Sarley's concerns about the corners. That's right, that it could be seen as just sort of almost too open, but I think we're going to have something here that can have that embracing, so it doesn't feel as undefined, I guess, is what Commissioner Sarley's worried about. Rightly so. I think the green ribbon, you be careful that it's the right proportion, that it's neither too wide nor too narrow. If it's too wide, it's not going to give that same feeling of comfort and enclosure. If it's too narrow, it's going to feel creepy. So we definitely want to decide that that's going to be really key. That's almost, I think, the key element of this entire block is getting that green ribbon right. Right, I know that. That's why I'm not going to get into it, but I'm just flagging that as, for me, that is really a key thing, especially on this block. It's almost the keystone to the green ribbon throughout the entire Pentagon City area.
So I'm just going to flag wind. I think the one thing that I remember saying it one time from PC, from the dais, and the concern has been for me right here, in right Colonial, you know, the Colonial office buildings. Like, it is awful in that space. And that Viper and I did kind of a walk through that area, and the problem is, of course, there's not an effective use of biophilic features, right? There's not enough trees. There's nothing to break it up, and I think about that a lot along this space too. What Karen was saying about the concrete jungle, so to speak. But like, there's so many buildings, and when we start thinking about like these tunnels, like it's hard to walk here in Courthouse when the wind is blowing, because we weren't necessarily always thinking about. So I just raise that as like, you know, let's make sure that we keep that on the front of mind for us, so that the user experience, it's not like they're going to fly away.
Leo made a comment that it reminded me of one other thing. I think it's under this category, although it certainly can get into the site plan level, but topography, especially in a site like this, wherever, if it's in the middle or if it's on the corner, or if it's a little bit down from the corner, but as part of figuring out the levels for the pavilions and the levels for the entrance to this and that and the green ribbon, it shouldn't all be flat. You know, there's a way to have very low grade undulations and topography in the planted areas and the activity areas. Maybe not so much the pathways, because that affects other things, people's use of them. But that can do a lot for your perception of where you are, that refuge and vista aspect of biophilic experience, and creating private places where people can have some a sense of separation from the hubbub. So yeah, just starting out thinking about how that all works too. So.
But you know, to this point, I remember talking to Commissioner Gearin about a trip that I had earlier this year or earlier last year, and stayed at a hotel in India, and like the experience in terms of how they used biophilia in their design was just remarkable. And the way that they were able to craft the building, you know, wasn't just aesthetically pleasing, but it's hot in India at certain times, right? But you wouldn't feel it necessarily because of the way that the design was, the way that, you know, they brought in vegetation, and it was, we don't do that, right? But there, we could. There's nothing that stops us, right? Well, there's some things, I guess.
No, but
but
it's funny that you mentioned that, because when I was at the Alhambra, it's the same thing. It's hot as hell there in the summer, but that site is the water trickling through, the use of trees, the openness, the materials. It's cool, it's calming, it's relaxing.
Even the vegetation.
It's just an amazing place, and it's been that way for centuries. I mean, it was built like, what was it, 1,000 years ago or something? Oh, 600 years ago, and it works today. It works today as it was planned to be, and it's all because of thoughtful features, and it's just phenomenal.
And I think that that obviously takes us
And
into
biophilia is it.
right, yeah, and I think it takes us into our next kind of big item, which is the public spaces and the green ribbon. Yes, sir.
Yeah, we've been talking about it. Yeah, that's, the sector plan is fantastic, and I think just, you know, feel it and live it, and I think you already have an idea of what to do, but coming forward with an actual phased plan where if the demolition all happened at the same time, but you'd be able to use one building site for the staging and create the other one, and also create, as Jim said, the public space as part of that, then you've got something that actually people can experience the benefit of it right away, you know, while the next one's, you know, still waiting to see how the wind blows financially and what it's going to be. So, but just in this context of the landscaping and the topography and the lower podium concept leaves open tons of opportunities for like trellises and pergolas and the kind of thing you're talking about in these places. You know, when we talk about a green wall, frankly, a green wall is a concept that comes from where you're trying to retrofit buildings that are right up to the sidewalk, but you can define spaces with a kind of trellis structure, maybe only be 6 feet wide, but sits there like a wall of trumpet honeysuckle with hummingbirds all around it and just standing there. It doesn't have to only be trees, and become part of the design and arrangement of spaces, the definition of pocket spaces and flowing spaces and that kind of thing. So I've talked too much already. So.
Well, I'm sorry, we missed Ben in the last round. Ben, sorry.
Oh.
We're not going to pick on you, but we are going to pick you.
Nope. Thank you. And I realized I didn't introduce myself. I'm representing the Crystal Pentagon City Citizens Review Council. No longer City Pentagon City Crystal City
we can't hear what you're saying, Ben.
whatever we're called now. Is this any better?
We're not really.
We could hear you before when you were on camera better. Yeah.
But is this better?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. All right. Thank you. I saw Tarsi nod first. Thank you, Tarsi. Sorry, I realized I didn't introduce myself. I'm representing the Crystal and Pentagon City Review Council here. Just speaking to kind of actually the intersection between the two conversations, I'm a little worried about the green ribbon pathway in terms of it being a feeling like a safe, inviting place. In terms of how the design is, I know that's sort of how the sector plan envisioned it, but the kind of width, right, and it depends on the width, but you're going to have, you know, kind of towers on either side of it, and it's going to be in shadow most of the time. And I think it's really important that when we talk about design guidelines, and as well as the kind of buildings are massed, that they're really done in a way that makes that space feel like there's not going to be someone in the shadows jumping out at you, that there are those biophilic elements, not just along the pathway, but actually on the buildings themselves. And I know this isn't just PRC, but when you get to the point of architectural design, looking at the buildings themselves as part of the green ribbon and using, right, green walls are mentioned or water elements on the actual buildings that make that kind of area safe and inviting. Because otherwise, when I look at it, and there's kind of a conversation during the LRPC for River House about, the correct location for the green ribbon there and whether it should be kind of on a street or between houses. And I made a comment there as well. Like, you really want, if you're sandwiched in between buildings, it's going to feel like a pathway. Like, you're going to want to get from one end to the other as quickly as possible. And it's really important to design it so that it's a place where you can sit and enjoy yourself, but while you're eating a sandwich or what have you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Ben. And following up on that and what David was talking about earlier, as far as the green ribbon, there was a mention of hummingbirds, and it should be a wildlife corridor so that from one end to the other, so that the hummingbirds and the butterflies and the foxes and all of the wildlife that's in our neighborhood can traverse through that area. Another question on the issue of demolition. Are the underground garages also being removed, or are you going to reuse some of the underground structures? Because there was a talk earlier about how trees and things can go in.
Given the existing structures, it's incredibly challenging to try and reuse those. Look at that infrastructure relative to new building footprints, the new requirements for some of the plantings, planting depths and the like. So it's anticipated that we'll be demolishing both and then rebuilding from the volume.
Demolishing simultaneously or demolishing only one? That comes later.
Phasing and market.
Okay.
Could I just jump in?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
I wanted to piggyback on something that Ben mentioned, and I think Peter highlighted earlier on. Now that we're in the green discussion, okay.
Been waiting for this
I
moment.
think
It's not to be confused with topic 1 and 2.
it's 1 second. Because this is really, I think, to help clarify the question in front of us, which is, are we okay with the level of density as proposed, right? Which we are. The true answer is, well, it depends. Are we meeting all the other elements of the sector plan? And there's only so much of that we can respond to based on the information that's given. So what I'm trying to point out is different elements of the sector plan, particularly in the appendix, that speak to at least the width, right? What is the starting point that we can't encroach any further into? Knowing that the design is going to change and the aspirational photos that are in the presentation are incredible, and I have full faith in the design team, but that space, right, from which, the dimensions are measured is really critical. So what you see on the slide are elements of that cross section that are in the sector plan, starting from, I know this is probably hard to read, on the left, the pedestrian path, which is the center portion, and then the planting zones that are basically on either side of that path. The pedestrian path is 8 to 12 feet in the sector plan, while the planting zones are 4 to 10 feet. And then the green ribbon guidelines in the sector plan talk about this menu of choices. Very flexible document, lots to choose from. What we do then is we look at the legend in the sector plan that speaks to the primary and secondary routes that the green ribbon has, because they're not all the same. Some are very critical. This is one of them. This gets you from the metro station onto the Penn Place block and further east even. So when we see that primary route, if you look at the legend itself, it says that primary is distinguished by having the widest pedestrian zone. So when we say the widest, that means it's on the 12-foot end of the spectrum when we look at the range, 8 to 12 feet. So that will ensure in these instances where we have a very dense site, right, that has to go vertical, that we are getting sight lines, we are getting visible conditions. As Ben mentioned, right, it feels safe and welcoming, beyond just the incredible design that I'm sure it's going to have. So just doing the math, right, when we look at cross-section now, to show up a little bit better on that slide, it's really the 12 feet in the middle for the pedestrian zone, 4 feet on either side for the planting strip. That gets us to a 20-foot minimum, that's 16, from which, and that's the other question, which we may not answer at this point, is what's happening on the frontages because we don't know what those uses are internal to the block, right? Is it a sidewalk, is it outdoor seating, cafe, whatever it might be? But those would be in addition to and above the 20-foot minimum that this particular and very critical path would require. So it's just something that, in addition to the proportion, the scale, considering these are 350-foot story buildings, you know, that's kind of the starting point that we're going to be looking for when SPRC begins to get more detail.
Can I add one thing to it? I mean, that is all obviously accurate. There are also statements in here about typical width of at least 16 feet. So that's I understand the difference with the primary route and these different dimensions, but there's also language about the 16 foot in the second.
The context is really important here because this gets to minimum standards. The 16-foot reference is more about typically throughout the entire corridor, the entire Pentagon City area, considering a typical width of 16 feet because it will vary. If you were to calculate the linear frontage that's required on all the sites, that gets to a total number of square feet that public spaces would deliver if all the sites were developed. So in that context, to help quantify the overall benefit of the entire Green network, that's when the 16-foot average came in as a helpful way to kind of just give a number, because we don't know what it is. Some sites will have less, some will have more. And to help provide further context, this is the primary route, so the pedestrian path has to be widest. In other areas where we have the secondary route, it's the planting strip that has to be wider, because they're not as critical to their, you know, connectivity and the volume of pedestrians. So that's kind of the numbers that you see in the second plan.
That's helpful, thank you. Okay.
Well, thank you, Matt.
Yeah.
As a pedestrian here.
As a pedestrian here.
I'm a real big fan of future green ribbons, and I'm glad to hear that we'll be pushing for wider pedestrian part and good greenery around it. Overall, in your open space and your green ribbon, can you keep the hardscape down as much as possible? We want it as green as possible. One example being in that park where their main central green area is green, it's grass. It doesn't have to necessarily be grass, but the more green we can have everywhere, the better for us, for the environment. If you do have grass, I'm not necessarily recommending that. You have to keep the dogs off. They've had to replace the grass at least twice already, which is really sad.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Yeah, so just piggybacking on Pam's, the two dog parks in that park, but I see people on the green lawn with their dogs all the time. So I think that just as a heads up, that big open grassy spaces are going to get turned into dog parks and may not be the best way to get that green biophilia we're looking for. Another thing I remembered about the Met Park was there were issues about them not being able to use water features because they were building over a parking structure and water getting in, and then also the soil depths. So if I heard you right, you're not going to preserve all of that underground parking structure, so you will be able to make the site to where the green areas are have sufficient soil depth and potentially be able to incorporate water features, possibly.
If I may clarify, we're not preserving the existing garages.
Okay.
There will be new garages underneath. So
Sure, right. But in areas where there's park space or a planted area where the green ribbon is it likely that there'll be parking directly underneath those areas? Okay, but it will be designed such a way that there'll be sufficient soil depth.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's a requirement of the tree canopy
Yeah.
coverage as well.
Yeah. I want big healthy trees in 30 or 40 years.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just jump on the less hardscape bandwagon. I live in the Met Park, just across from Met Park, and while I recognize that there are some, challenges with dog parks and a lack thereof dog parks in the area, so people use open spaces, it's really nice to get to an open space that's just grassy when you're surrounded by all these buildings. And so I think from just a sort of how it feels, it doesn't need to be the hardscape necessarily, but would just be interested in what other options there could be explored. And then I think meeting the minimum 25% is great, but to the extent that we can actually push beyond a minimum, I realize that there's sort of, baselines that need to be met, but I think if we could be a little bit more ambitious about preserving or ensuring some open space and tree canopy for future generations, I think that would be really good to think about the long term as we keep developing other places. I've lived in Pentagon City as a renter for 15 years, and I remember when 12th Street was a dirt path and there was all this open space. And so I love the benefits of living in a highly dense urban area, but a lot of people are very concerned about that.
Can you add a Zen garden?
What is a Zen garden?
In Japan, so they have like Zen
Right.
gardens. No, it's just in the middle of sort of any building. You have a place of contemplation, and you can go there. It's very with biophilia, and I'm sort of joking, but
But something, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's actually
And it's like an activity. There's like an activity to it, maybe.
Yeah, and it's so that people, it's sort of busy in the cities, but you have it like sort of within the courtyard, where you have all this space. It's just a place where you can just contemplate, where it's like, yes, you can grab a sandwich, but it's not, it's less busy area than everything else. So it feels like a little Zen garden within, it's a quieter area within sort of where there's, respite from the city life in a way.
You can actually incorporate like the wall of the building as part of the back.
I'm sorry.
I wanted to request that you're very intentional about including stormwater management features as part of the green ribbon. So the types of plantings that you include and kind of anything you can add on the periphery. And then I was also wondering about how much of the green ribbon is meandering. And it's kind of trying to find a balance between it being a thoroughfare for people getting from Metro to Penn Place, but also discouraging high-speed bikes on that route. So just two things to think about.
I'm gonna skip back a little bit. No, the opposite. I'm gonna longer than you expected.
No, I don't know.
Quick, I'm just gonna piggyback on, sorry, I forget your name.
Jacob.
Mr. Jacoby's comment about the demolition. I know that is a little bit burdensome for the developing team, but I cannot exaggerate or hyperbolize the energy cost associated with steel and concrete that's in that basement. And like if you can save the bathtub, if you can save any of the parking levels, any of the structure, you just get that much more ahead. Even if you did like an energy positive, sort of building, it would take years to recoup the cost of the removal, the associated cost of the original construction, then the associated cost of removing and demoing that. It's just, so anything that you can preserve is just absolutely gold as far as I'm concerned. The other thing is on the footprint of the building, keeping in mind some of the repurposing that we're seeing around different cities, not so much here, but, that are transforming offices to residential mostly right now, but who knows, it could go the other way sometime. I think the trick to that is smaller or narrower footprints, right? Mostly on office buildings that want the big footprints to have the sort of cubicle farms and whatnot. If we can sort of keep the footprint of the building narrow enough so that it potentially could be converted to residential, repurposed for residential at some point, if the market goes that way. Finally, to get to the issue at hand, and this might be a little bit more for staff in the community, I'm gonna reference the High Line, which I know. Well, it's so cliche that it's now becoming cool again, probably, right? But it has that quality of just absolute clarity, right? You absolutely know that you're on the High Line because it's above, it's impossible to miss, right? So my question on the trail here is like, what's the yellow brick road factor to it? Right? Like, how do you know, right, where I cross the street and pick it back up? Where's the continuity element throughout, just for navigation purposes and use, and like I think of the what was it, the Skywalk in Roslyn? I mean, that was a nightmare, right? If you knew it, it was kind of fun, right? You had to cut through parking areas and then go on this bridge and go underside of the gas station bridge, which is still, I think, the only one in the universe. But I think, if there's some way for us to create a continuity, it could be signage, it could be detailing, although it might be too late to sort of put too many of the sort of specifics guideline. But I think that's something that we probably, as a community, can continue to work with and augment, so that this trail becomes very intuitive and very sort of continuous. So that's it. Thanks.
Really?
That was actually
I'm
something.
proud of you.
That was something that came up in the River House Walk. I was talking to the Parks and Rec representative. He said that they are actually trying to do some sort of consistent, like branding wayfinding for the entire green ribbon that would be intuitive and right away. Yeah, that's a continuation of the green ribbon. That's what that sign means. That's what the way that looks means. So that was actually I raised that very much for those very reasons at the River House Walk, because we were talking about the green ribbon going through there.
Right.
And how that would work. So apparently the county staff is already looking into that. They're trying to figure that out. And we have time to do it because it's still to be done. But it means when we start delivering it, we should be ready to put something in there right away.
Did you have a comment?
No, other than that, nope.
Okay. So I was just going to say that when we talk about surface, just making sure that it's surface that all the obvious ones, but maybe one that is not so obvious. And I will say, I kind of jokingly said this to Jim, but it's not really a joke. I mean,
It's written.
When people are wearing high heels, there are often places that it's really challenging to walk. Yes, really challenging to walk. One place, the Alexandria Courthouse, difficult to walk there because the spaces in between the bricks make it very challenging for people who wear high heels.
The grading downstairs in front of this building.
Yep, the grading in front of this, but there's lots, so when we think about surfaces, just making sure that it's not only accessible for mobility devices, but also for individuals, and their shoe preference. I don't know what other way to say it, but you know what I mean? You won't be able to access it if you can't if you have a challenge accessing it, right, or utilizing it. So you had another comment you wanted to make.
There was one other quick bandwagon that I wanted to jump on that I forgot to mention about sort of and I know this is an SPRC, but just in terms of how long the timeline is for this whole project and sort of where does the green ribbon space element fit in for each phase of the projects as they break down. So one of the things, again, that we've had in Crystal City is that all of the buildings were happening at a point where there were no parks that were accessible for years. And so I think, in this particular area, is there a way to sort of see how each of the development sites will have the green ribbon piece built as it goes and not just sort of completed at the end of the project? And I know that's already been said, so I'm jumping on that bandwagon. And then a comment came up about fast bikes through the space. And it made me realize that I forgot to ask about bike access in general around the site and where the bike sort of lanes will be. And that sort of goes to maybe the 11th Street through connector and kind of if there's loading docks there, which I don't know if that's where they're going to be, but if there's bikes and loading docks, where all that. So that's more of transportation. I know we're not doing that tonight, so I don't expect to get
We'll put a pin in those.
We'll put a pin in those.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Ben, you don't have your hand up. This time I'm not going to miss you, but I don't think you actually wanted to say anything on this particular point. So that's everything for tonight. That's all. Do you have something, you want to say something?
I'll just say there was a comment before about, soliciting input for community benefits. There's another portion of the green ribbon that's supposed to run along Hayes. That's supposed to be, I believe, the idea would be the county would build it and use public funds, and those public funds are going to be hard to come by in the next few years, more likely. And so a potential community benefit would be considering construction of the green ribbon along Hayes. So I just wanted to flag that.
Thank you. So listen, we've come to the end of our night. You had a lot of places you could have chosen to be, but we're glad you chose to be here with us. Stay tuned for LRPC number 2.
Can I add a last comment?
Sure, go ahead.
Because several people mentioned that park as an example of in one way or another. I just wanted to say, that was planted last spring. In September, I went twice. I already documented 15 species of butterflies and bees, photos, and 6 species of birds. That's only 2 times in less than 5 months of growing. So when we talk about nature in an urban setting, that's real. And that, I'm not counting the 20, I don't know what the species are of the 20 or so bird carcasses that they found that hit the glass next to the upper terraces, because that wasn't bird glass. But when you have planted terraces, you need to do the 12 or 20 feet, 15 feet above that, which I know is happening in Penn Place.
Put a plug in for Elizabeth Gearin, 30 feet. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, I don't think. Oh.
Kids,
Yeah.
you know, and they just react.
Thank you.